6:02 a.m. on a Thursday. Not 6:01, not 6:03. Exactly 6:02 when my badge blinked red in front of the data center's main entrance. I stood there with my coffee in one hand, ID card in the other, staring at the little light as if it had just told me a bad joke. It blinked once, twice, then went dead. I didn't curse. I didn't sigh. I didn't even try again. I just stood still, like I was daring the thing to keep laughing at me. Most people in this company thought of me as the badge lady, the person who handed out lanyards and reset passwords for door readers. They never understood that for 18 years, I wasn't managing the system. I was the system. Buried in the humming basement of this corporate fortress, between racks of servers and stale coffee, I had written scripts nobody else could even read. I had patched firmware at 2 a.m, while the fluorescent lights buzzed like tinnitus in my skull. I had memorized every undocumented quirk of the old authentication trees, every failover switch tied to a daemon process I'd hand-coded during an ice storm in 2011. If you peeled back the drywall in the security wing, you'd probably find my initials etched on the pipes. That's how long I'd been here. Long enough for the building itself to feel like an extension of my nervous system. But none of that mattered anymore. Not to them. To the suits upstairs, I was just non-core, a line item, a relic of what they called legacy infrastructure, the kind of thing you replace with a shiny vendor product and a press release about modernization. It didn't matter that I had caught breaches at 3 a.m., or that I was the reason they passed their last compliance audit. It didn't matter that when a badge anomaly almost let in an intruder 6 months ago, I was the one who stayed all night chasing log entries until I found the spoofed credential buried under 6 layers of garbage requests. Nobody cared about that. All they cared about was trimming budgets and looking clever on LinkedIn. I remember when I first joined, back when this place still smelled like drywall dust and burnt solder. The badge system then was a Frankenstein mess running on a cobbled SQL box I nursed with spit and duct tape. No one else wanted to touch it because no one else understood it. Over the years, I built it out, layered it, made it smarter. I gave it defenses the vendors hadn't thought of, redundancies that looked insane on paper, but saved us when the East Coast blackout rolled through. 18 years of care and paranoia woven into the digital skeleton of the building. And yet, in the end, my entire existence in this company was reduced to a plastic rectangle that blinked red at exactly 6:02 a.m. I knew what had happened even before I tried the door. This wasn't an error. This wasn't a glitch. I had seen the audit trail 2 days before. The deactivation order buried under a pile of approvals from contractors who couldn't code their way out of a JSON loop. Darren's signature buried in the metadata like a smug little fingerprint. He thought of it as streamlining, a quiet little execution that saved him from having to look me in the eye. He wanted me gone, but not officially. Too messy to fire me outright. Easier to just let the system spit me out like a corrupted file. Disable the badge, let HR handle the paperwork later, and in the meantime, call it modernization. It was cowardly, but predictable. That's how Darren operated. Always smiling, always armed with a buzzword, always ready to trade human context for a prettier slide deck. So I stood there, coffee cooling in my hand, staring at the dead badge reader. 18 years reduced to a blink of red light. My badge, my access, my entire presence in this building erased by a man who thought zero trust was something you could actually buy off the shelf. I didn't wave at the guard. I didn't go plead with HR. I didn't march into Darren's glass office demanding answers. I turned around, walked to my car, and drove home. Quiet, controlled, precise. Because deep down, I already knew. If Darren thought disabling my badge meant I was gone, he didn't understand the difference between access and control. The thing about people like Darren is they don't walk into a room. They announce themselves like a sponsored podcast ad, glossy, overproduced, and full of words that mean nothing. He arrived 3 months before my badge blinked red, fresh from whatever expensive MBA factory churns out these so-called disruptors, carrying the smell of overpriced cologne and a resume padded with acronyms. He called himself an optimizer. I called him a parasite with a PowerPoint addiction. The first time he used the phrase digital synergy in my presence, I stared at him so long he actually asked if I was okay. I was fine. He just wasn't worth blinking for. The second time, I excused myself and went back to the basement, because fluorescent lights and server fans made more sense to me than listening to a boy in a tailored suit tell me how my system could be modernized. The jokes started around week 2. They always do when someone new needs to prove himself by tearing down what already works. Contractors tossed around barbs like legacy system or boomer tech from the open office pods, like children whispering behind the teacher's back. Someone left a sticky note on my desk one morning. "Does the ghost in the shell need coffee?" It was meant to be funny, a morale-building prank, Darren called it. But I didn't remove it. I scanned it, tagged it, filed it digitally like everything else. That's what I did. I filed, I documented, I recorded, because someday the system would need those receipts. And unlike Darren, I never trusted memory to do the job of evidence. The meetings were the real giveaways. Closed doors, quiet voices, the sound of my own future being erased in language crafted to sound progressive. I knew exactly where to stand in the hallway to catch fragments through the air vents. Darren with his smooth MBA cadence, telling executives, "We can cut 2 heads in access control if we migrate to Flex Shield. Camille's got 1 foot in retirement anyway." 1 foot, huh? Funny how I was still the one logging 3 a.m. badge anomalies that saved them from a 4-act breach last quarter. Still the one who patched a failing switch in freezing temperatures while Darren was asleep on a memory foam mattress. But in his world, optics mattered more than uptime, and words like retirement were easier to sell than admitting he didn't understand a system built on decades of undocumented logic. I had seen men like Darren before. Smooth talkers who never soldered a board or stayed up chasing an intermittent fault until dawn. They thrived in meetings but collapsed in server rooms. They came in waves, every 5 or 6 years, bringing new jargon with them. First, it was streamlining, then lean transformation, then cloud-first strategy, and now zero trust. None of it stuck. What stuck was me, the one who stayed behind after the buzzwords faded, making sure the doors opened, the logs balanced, and the system kept breathing. But this time, I felt the shift. Darren wasn't just passing through. He was building his empire, one cost-cutting measure at a time, and people like me were ballast he planned to jettison. The cuts started small. Hours shaved off schedules, responsibilities reassigned to contractors half my age who barely knew the difference between a subnet and a sandwich. Jerry, my colleague since the early days, got the email first. A cheery little message thanking him for years of service and reminding him to turn in his badge. Jerry called laptops units and still labeled his flash drives with masking tape, but he was reliable, steady, and sharp in ways Darren would never appreciate. A week later, it was Alina. "Restructured," they said, like she was drywall being knocked out for an open floor plan. That word became the flavor of the month. Restructured, redundant, optimized. Behind every one of those terms was Darren's smirk, polished and rehearsed for boardrooms. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I came in every morning, sat at my desk, and documented. Thoroughly, meticulously, obsessively. Because even if my badge was still green then, I knew red was coming. And when it came, I wasn't surprised. Darren thought of it as victory, a neat little trick, the kind of thing he could present as a win for efficiency. But I understood something Darren didn't. Systems don't forget the people who built them. They carry ghosts, fingerprints, dependencies that never make it into vendor diagrams. He thought he had replaced me with Flex Shield and a batch of contractors. But what he'd really done was cut the heart out of a body and expect it to keep breathing. I didn't stop him. I didn't warn him. I just kept my silence, because sometimes silence is sharper than sabotage, and sometimes you have to let a system prove its loyalty by falling apart without you. The thing about slow erasure is you don't always notice it when it begins. One day, you've got 38 open tickets, patches stacked like firewood, anomalies to chase down, and the next you're staring at 3 issues assigned to some kid who thinks Scuzzy is an anime character. At first, I thought it was a fluke. Systems fluctuate, workloads shift, but then it became a pattern. Tickets I normally handled went missing, rerouted to contractors who didn't even know where the backup node closet was located. My calendar thinned. Meetings I used to attend disappeared from invites. My name vanished from project logs as if 18 years of root-level access had never happened. Non-core, they called it, and the word followed me like a shadow through every hallway. Jerry was the first casualty. He was old school in the best way. A man who labeled his thumb drives with masking tape and called every laptop a unit. But when things broke, Jerry fixed them without panic, without fanfare. Darren fired him with a cheery email thanking him for his years of dedication and reminding him to turn in his badge. Just like that, a man who had been here since before the last reorg was reduced to a polite dismissal and a recycled access card. Alina went next. Restructured, they said. The word rolled out like it had been polished by a PR team. Restructured, like she was drywall being removed to make space for Darren's glass-walled office. She didn't even get a goodbye lunch, just a perfunctory announcement and a thin smile from HR. That was the rhythm now. Erase, replace, repeat. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I came in every day, sat at my desk in the cage of patch cables and laminators, and documented. I wrote logs the way monks copy scripture, quietly, obsessively, because I knew someday the gospel would matter. I watched the systems I had nurtured get ported to transitional environments that barely functioned. I watched the ticket load vanish until I had none. The silence was louder than any confrontation, and I sat in it, waiting. Then came the day my badge failed. It wasn't dramatic. No alarms, no flashing screens, just a red blink on a Thursday morning in front of Sector 2, my sector. I tried once, twice, then stopped. A guard, barely old enough to rent a car, offered to reset the reader for me. His voice cracked like he wasn't sure if I was staff or visitor. I shook my head. Don't bother. He probably thought I was tired, maybe even senile, but I wasn't. I already knew. 2 days earlier, I'd traced the audit logs and found the change order, hidden under a storm of approvals from new hires who couldn't code their way out of a for loop. Asset Legacy 113, that was me. The line item Darren had marked for deactivation. The signature belonged to some third-party contractor in Georgia who had never met me, never seen the system, but had the authority to erase me with one keystroke. I wasn't fired. I wasn't even formally terminated. I was phased out like a piece of outdated equipment. That's how Darren liked to play it. He wanted me gone without the mess of HR, without the liability of severance, without the dignity of a face-to-face. Disable the badge, let the system spit me out, and call it modernization. He probably thought it was efficient, maybe even clever. But clever doesn't fix systems at 3 a.m., and clever doesn't build protocols that keep intruders out during a 0-day exploit. Clever doesn't solder a board in a freezing server room while alarms scream overhead. Clever doesn't know the difference between redundancy and resilience. Clever doesn't know that erasing me from the system meant erasing the very scaffolding holding it upright. So I didn't march to HR. I didn't storm Darren's office. I didn't demand explanations or apologies. I walked out. No dramatic pauses, no slammed doors, no grand speeches. I didn't even take the framed photo of the old crew from the 2009 upgrade project, the one where we looked like survivors after a hurricane, standing proudly in front of a Frankenstein sequel box that should have died a decade earlier. I didn't log out of my terminal. I didn't leave a resignation note. I just left. And when I got home, I didn't pour myself a glass of wine or rage post on Facebook. I pulled out my old ThinkPad, booted into a shell, and began watching. Because if Darren thought disabling my badge meant I was gone, he was about to learn the difference between access and control. The first failure came the following Tuesday at exactly 9:17 a.m. I wasn't there, of course, but I didn't need to be. My ThinkPad's shell window told me everything. Sector 4 refused entry to 3 contractors scheduled to service a cooling cluster. Their badges blinked red, then nothing. They thought it was a power blip. A reset fixed it for 6 minutes. Then Sector 7 died. 10 minutes later, the freight access door locked itself in a closed loop and wouldn't open for the delivery team waiting with a rack of new hardware. They stood in the parking lot for 2 hours before anyone noticed they were still out there. I didn't touch a thing. I didn't need to. The system was already unraveling, like a sweater snagged on a nail. Darren called it integration friction. He tossed that phrase out in meetings like it explained something, like it was a force of nature instead of his own ignorance. He talked about latency differentials and infrastructure maturity, while the Flex Shield dashboard pinged with false positives and unknown device IDs. The contractors didn't know what they were looking at, so they did what they always do. Reboot. Reboot again. Reboot until the floor is on fire. One of them reset an entire segment of access nodes without checking the failover dependencies, which took out authentication for half the biometric scanners on the East Wing. A vendor got stuck in a sub-basement stairwell for 26 minutes. The emergency latch had rusted shut years ago because no one tested it since I left. I sipped coffee on my porch and watched the logs roll across my screen like prayer beads. Every flag, every timeout, every dependency loop. I knew them all. They weren't errors. They were my fingerprints, the hand-tuned bash scripts I had layered in over years, the protective quirks I designed to catch spoofed badges, the little watchdog demons that kept ghost devices from spamming the logs into a death spiral. Darren dismissed them as undocumented quirks, but they were the bones of the system. Without me to tend them, they began to decay. By Thursday, 5 badge readers were down. The board liaison was already asking questions, but Darren kept smiling, voice smooth, cadence steady. "Just a transition period," he said, the way a pilot might call engine fire a performance anomaly. He didn't realize that the system understood him better than he understood it. It had lived under my hands for almost 2 decades. It knew the difference between care and neglect. It had grown loyal, and now, abandoned, it was lashing out in the only way a system can, through silence and denial. The first message came from a junior sysadmin named Aaron, nervous kid, hoodie stained with energy drink. He found me on LinkedIn. "Hey Camille, sorry to bug you, but did you ever patch that Tier 3 loop that triggers when node B2.44 tries to sync? I think it's back. Logs are going crazy." I read it. Of course I did. I even hovered over the reply box, fingers itching to type the fix. But I didn't. I closed the window, refreshed my shell, and watched as 5 more systems tripped dependency timeouts. The thing about neglect is it snowballs. 1 badge failure becomes 3. 3 become 12. Each reboot creates a ripple that knocks another subsystem out of sync. The building started eating itself 1 door at a time. Darren thought modernization meant cutting ties to the past, but all he'd done was cut out the only person who could explain why the building still breathed at all. The contractors panicked, HR whispered, the board fretted, but I sat quietly, wrapped in a fleece blanket on my porch, and let the system tell its story. I hadn't lifted a finger. Not one command sent, not one packet altered. And yet the system was collapsing, because that's what happens when you erase the caretaker, but leave her work behind. The doors didn't just fail. They mourned. They refused. They blinked red like they were laughing. And Darren still thought it was under control. It happened at 4:07 a.m. on a Monday, sudden and quiet, like a stroke. One moment, the dashboard was its usual mosaic of green. The next it froze, blinked once, and turned into a solid grid of red. Every badge reader in the building, executive floor, loading dock, biometric checkpoint, even the groaning old freight elevator, dead. The first person to notice was the janitor who couldn't unlock the lobby closet to restock paper towels. He called facilities, who thought he'd butt-dialed them. By the time first shift arrived, the parking lot looked like Black Friday outside a locked Best Buy. Engineers, admins, contractors, all stuck outside, holding laptops like useless talismans, staring at doors that refused to open. The panic didn't start with a scream. It started with a Slack ping. Anyone else locked out? Then another. My badge isn't working and I've got to reboot Delta nodes before the update script pushes. And then the flood. Backup's not triggering. Doors won't cycle. What the hell is happening? By 4:13, the access control server was logging over 10,000 denial pings per minute. The log file ballooned to 4 gigabytes in 12 minutes, overwriting itself in a recursive loop. Scripts I had written years ago to catch spoofed credentials. Scripts no one bothered to monitor after Darren cut me out. Began calling deprecated paths. Those paths no longer existed. Each call failed, retried, failed again. Infinite recursion. CPU pinned at 99%. No failover, no escape hatch. At 4:19, the diagnostics flagged incomplete dependency trees. That was my dead man switch, a safeguard I designed years ago after a vendor tried brute forcing a badge sync. The system was looking for my private credential hash to finalize boot, and of course it didn't find it. Darren had deleted my user profile. Brilliant move. Without it, the backup codes were worthless. The biometric fallback chained into the same verification loop. Everything tied back to me, and everything now hung in limbo because I wasn't there. Inside, a handful of overnight staff realized they were trapped. They huddled in the vending lounge, trying not to panic. One kid tried calling Flex Shield support. They were asleep in Dubai. Another suggested breaking a window, but legal had spent half a year proving those windows were security rated to withstand small arms fire. No one was getting out without me. Meanwhile, the racks began cooking themselves. Access control wasn't just doors. It was airflow zoning, cooling overrides, emergency vent authorizations, all chained to physical verification. When the badge system failed, cooling defaulted to safe mode, which meant no action at all. At 6:12, rack cluster Delta hit 103 degc. By 6:30, blades began auto-shutting down. Monitoring dashboards grayed out. Remote management timed out. The Flex Shield AI flagged it as suspicious hardware activity, like a toddler mislabeling a hurricane as windy. Clients noticed before Darren did. By 7:02, 2 enterprise accounts had filed SLA violation notices. One hospital system lost access to medical records. Another lost overnight backups for 4,000 users. The penalties were 6 figures per hour. Still, no one could get into the building. Darren's phone blew up. The COO screamed legal exposure. The VP of infrastructure called a locksmith who laughed until he realized they weren't joking. He quoted $7,000 and a 4-hour ETA. Too late. From my porch, wrapped in a blanket, I watched logs scroll silently across my ThinkPad, coffee cooling beside me, cat asleep at my feet. I hadn't touched a thing. The system was dismantling itself with surgical precision, each failure chained to another like falling dominoes. It wasn't sabotage, it was absence. It was a building proving who it had really belonged to all along. By 8:11, Darren was on a board call, sweat soaking his collar, trying to explain why a Tier 3 data center rated for 6 nines uptime was flatlined without cyber attack, natural disaster, or visible sabotage. He stammered about unforeseen complexities and integration variances, while the directors circled like sharks. He didn't dare say my name. He didn't dare admit he had erased the only person who could keep the lights on. I sipped my coffee and let the silence answer for me. By the time Darren realized the building was eating itself, it was too late to pretend it was just a transition period. Flex Shield's dashboard looked like Christmas lights gone feral, alerts firing in every direction, false positives layered over genuine failures until nobody could tell the difference. He called the vendor first, of course. They bounced him from one department to another, finally landing on a call center in Estonia, where some cheerful rep chirped, "Local hardware is your responsibility." Darren slammed the phone so hard the case cracked, but the system didn't care about his tantrums. The badge servers were still caught in a recursive storm, looping requests that choked every switch they touched. He tried rebooting from his tablet. Nothing responded. The subnet was gone, swallowed by infinite failure. By sunrise, the contractors were texting him directly, their panic bleeding into all caps. "Can't node beta. Trapped in East Wing. Backups won't initiate." Darren ignored half of them, convinced that if he stayed calm and authoritative, the optics might still favor him. But optics don't cool servers. At 7:12 a.m., the first rack breached critical temperature and auto shut down. By 8 o'clock, the monitoring dashboards were gray tombstones. At 9 o'clock, the local news aired B-roll of employees milling outside the sealed glass monolith, caption scrolling. "Major tech firm suffers data center outage. Cause under investigation." I watched it from my kitchen, one leg tucked under me, sipping gas station tea. Not smiling, not gloating, just letting the quiet truth settle. They didn't know who to blame. And that was justice in its purest form. Darren wasn't so calm anymore. By 10:15, he flew in a forensic IT consultancy with a name that sounded like a hedge fund for Bond villains. They charged $1,800 an hour, wore blazers like armor, and strutted through the half-dead network like surgeons ready to operate. After 1 hour of scanning, their lead guy, Bluetooth earpiece gleaming, announced, "Looks like someone designed these dependencies to cannibalize themselves." Darren blinked like the words were a foreign language. "What does that mean?" The consultant didn't soften the blow. "It means your system is collapsing inward, and we don't have root access to stop it." The unspoken question hung heavy. Who built this? Darren swallowed, his silence answering for him. At 11:03, he tried calling my old desk phone. It rang 7 times before my voicemail kicked in. "If this is a badge-related emergency, it's already too late." I had recorded that message years ago as a joke, never thinking it would land like a guillotine blade on his ears. He stared at the receiver like it had insulted his family, but still, he didn't call again. Pride dies slower than systems do. By noon, pride gave way to desperation. Darren paced stairwells, tie gone, hair wild, whisper screaming into his phone between frantic Slack pings. HR refused to own it, legal was drafting disclaimers, facilities threatened to walk, and the CIO sent him a single line. "You told me Flex Shield had us covered." Darren's world was collapsing faster than the badge servers, and for once, he couldn't jargon his way out. Finally, at 12:41, he opened Gmail. Subject line, "Urgent, need assistance." Body, "Camille, I believe we are experiencing significant access control failures. I would like to request your assistance in resolving this matter. Please respond at your earliest convenience." The tone was almost polite, almost humble, but I could still feel the arrogance in the phrasing, the assumption that I was still available to him like some on-call technician. I read it. I closed it. I let him stew. Hours passed. By 4:22 p.m., another message appeared. This one wasn't polite, it was frantic, clipped, raw. System still offline. Clients furious. Please, we need you. That was the first time he'd admitted need, and it tasted like vindication. My reply was 6 words. My consulting rate is $400 hour. Prepaid. No refunds, nothing else, no explanations, no greetings. Just a number, like I was quoting him for pest removal. He wired $4,000 immediately. That was desperation, pure and unfiltered. 10 minutes later, I sent him a session link. When his face appeared on my screen, his forehead gleamed like pork under a heat lamp. He begged for instructions. I gave him one. Open the override port on node B2.44. The fallback script was waiting for permission. He scrambled, obeyed, and one zone flickered back to life. Only one. He exhaled like a drowning man catching a straw. Thank God, he muttered. Can you do the rest now? I stared at him through the camera, flat as stone. That wasn't the deal. You prepaid for 1 hour, and I only bill what I work. Then I disconnected. The silence that followed wasn't technical. It was personal. Darren had optimized me out, erased me like I was legacy clutter. And now the only thing keeping his empire from total collapse was a woman who no longer worked there, charging him by the hour. By the next morning, Darren's inbox looked like a bonfire. Client complaints stacked in unread chains, the board demanding hourly updates, legal warning of breach penalties, and infrastructure crying for immediate resolution. At 7:12 a.m., he finally received the email that mattered. Subject line, restoration proposal, terms attached. The body was just one sentence. If you want the building breathing again, read the PDF. He opened it, expecting a ransom note written in crayon. What he found was a surgically worded, legally ironclad contract. Title, Executive Consulting Agreement, Camille Harper. 3 pages, clean and brutal. Clause 1. I would be reinstated, not as a technician, not as a legacy asset, but as Chief Access Security Architect, a role that did not exist yesterday, but would now report directly to the board, bypassing Darren entirely. Clause 2. I would hold full veto power over any vendor touching the access, authentication, or facility management stack, including Flex Shield. Clause 3. Retroactive hazard pay for every hour of unpaid midnight firefighting across the last decade. Clause 4. Consulting rates locked, prepaid, non-refundable. Darren's pulse must have spiked into triple digits reading those lines. He called legal first, hoping for leverage. Their reply was curt. You don't have a leg to stand on. Also, you're an idiot. He called the board, but they were already assembled in an emergency video call. 10 gray-haired executives across 10 angry time zones glaring into their cameras. The chairman's voice was gravel soaked in jet fuel. Can she fix it? Darren stammered something about transition periods and unforeseen variances, but the chairman cut him off. Yes or no? Darren swallowed. Yes. Then shut up and sign. The digital signatures were processed before I even finished my breakfast. By 11:45, I was back in front of the same main entrance that had rejected me days before. Same coffee in one hand, same badge in the other. Except this time, the door opened without hesitation. 2 interns, wide-eyed and pale, held it for me like I was royalty. I didn't rush. I didn't even glance at the badge readers still blinking red across the other zones like guilty children caught in a lie. I walked straight through the building as if it were a cathedral, every step echoing the truth Darren had tried to erase. This was my system, and it always had been. Inside, I went to the old terminal they had tried to decommission 3 times, but never succeeded. It booted in 30 seconds, loyal as ever. I slid my ThinkPad into its port, opened 6 console windows, and began pulling bones from the grave. First hour, I re-enabled the fallback authentication daemon Darren had deleted. Second, I untangled his vendor spaghetti, scrubbing out a Flex Shield module mislabeled Sync Godino that had been spamming recursive pings to an empty IP address in Luxembourg. Cooling came back online. Badge readers chirped awake one by one. Biometric fallback confirmed authorization. Logs stabilized. Temperatures dropped. The building exhaled for the first time in 3 days. I didn't say a word. I just printed a single sheet of paper and slid it across Darren's desk. His shirt was wrinkled, eyes bloodshot, tie forgotten on a chair. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I didn't wait for him to read it. I only said one line. "This is your training manual now." He glanced down. Bold title, 16-point font. Redundancy doesn't equal resilience. His lips moved, but no words came out. I turned and walked away, every click of my boots a lesson he'd never forget. In that moment, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about recognition. It was about proof. Proof that systems don't live in glossy pitch decks or vendor contracts. They live in the hands that build them, patch them, nurse them through the night when everyone else is asleep. Darren had tried to erase me, and the building itself had revolted. Now I was back, not as a forgotten name buried in logs, but as the architect standing above it all, with authority carved into contract and silence. My return wasn't permanent. It was never meant to be. I knew it. The building knew it. Even Darren knew it, though he'd never admit it out loud. Systems may forgive temporary neglect, but they don't forget betrayal, and neither do I. So once the last badge reader blinked green, once the cooling fans hummed steady again, once the building breathed like a body pulled back from the edge of death, I did what I always do. I documented. Not just patches and fixes, not just demons re-enabled and vendor modules excised, but the whole autopsy. Every ignorant decision, every reckless deletion, every time Darren optimized me out of relevance and nearly cost the company its spine, I wrote it down. Not in a rant, not in an angry Facebook post. In prose so dry it could sandpaper wood, precise enough to nail down each timestamp, each causal chain, each arrogant assumption that turned into a choke point. At 7 a.m., sharp the next morning, my resignation landed in the company inbox. Subject line: Final credential termination. C. Harper. No body text. Just an attachment. 147 pages titled How to Lose Your Infrastructure in 7 Days, a Postmortem of Ignorance and Arrogance by Camille Harper. It was brutal in its restraint, lethal in its accuracy. I didn't need adjectives. I had logs. I had audit trails. I had screenshots of Slack messages where Darren joked that I probably still thought punch cards were a thing. Slide decks couldn't erase that. Legal couldn't soften it. HR couldn't spin it. I didn't stick around to watch them squirm. I didn't wait for Darren to storm into my empty cubicle or for executives to scramble over who would clean up the mess of my words. I walked out the same way I had walked out before, quiet, steady, without flourish. This time, though, I left something behind. I uploaded a redacted copy of the report to a niche sysadmin form under the handle badge 47. I scrubbed company names, blacked out logos, anonymized faces, but left the meat untouched. Within 24 hours, it was everywhere. Hacker News, Reddit's RLS sysadmin, private Discord servers. Even LinkedIn, where people with titles like infrastructure visionary were dissecting my paragraphs like scripture. The report caught fire because it wasn't just about one company. It was about every company that ever thought modernization meant gutting experience in favor of buzzwords. Every Darren who believed an MBA certificate was root access. Every board that confused redundancy with resilience. Sysadmins called it the finest revenge submission since the printer spooler incident of 2016. Clients began quoting it back to the company in negotiations. By day 3, one of our biggest enterprise customers had highlighted entire sections in a conference call, asking Darren why their optimized infrastructure matched the failures I described in excruciating detail. By day 5, Darren was gone. No announcement, no farewell. Just erased as quietly as he had tried to erase me. His office emptied, his name deleted from oversight committees, his tie probably still crumpled in a corner somewhere. And me? I didn't flinch. I didn't celebrate. I was already busy. While Darren burned, my inbox filled with offers. A multinational reached out first. Subject line: "Can you teach us how not to screw this up from the start?" I didn't say yes. I sent my rate sheet. They paid in full. Others followed, some desperate, some cautious, all aware that behind their glossy diagrams and AI dashboards lived legacy quirks only people like me could navigate. I became a consultant not because I sought it, but because the world finally understood that systems need ghosts, and I was done haunting for free. At home, my office looked different now. Brighter, lighter, freer. But on the shelf above my desk, framed in glass, sat the only relic that mattered. My old badge, the one that had blinked red at 6:02 a.m. Above it, a brass plate engraved with the line, "I wanted Darren, the board, and anyone else who thought they could replace me to read forever." You should have asked what I do before deciding I didn't matter. The LED on the badge was long dead, but I wasn't. Not even close. My systems lived in silence, in code, in quirks that only made sense to me, and now companies paid me dearly to keep them alive. Darren thought he'd written me out of relevance, but all he did was write the opening line of my second career. Consulting wasn't a career shift, it was an inevitability. The moment my report went viral, the industry saw me differently, not as a badge technician tucked away in a basement, but as the architect who had let a data center collapse under its own arrogance and lived to write the autopsy. Calls came in from Seattle, from New York, from Singapore. Some companies begged me to audit their infrastructures before they suffered the same fate. Others wanted me to train their engineers to teach them the difference between redundancy and resilience. I never accepted all of them. I didn't need to. The ones I chose wired retainers larger than my old annual salary before I even booked the flight. Darren's failure had written my marketing copy better than I ever could. I became a ghost consultant, visible only when summoned, effective only when paid. I didn't do motivational talks or glossy slide decks. I brought my ThinkPad, my shell windows, and the hard truth that no vendor pitch could mask the rot of systems neglected. Sometimes I fixed things, sometimes I simply explained why they would break. Either way, I stopped being invisible. My signature appeared on contracts that placed me above CIOs, with veto rights, hazard clauses, and the freedom to walk away the moment someone tried to treat me like an accessory instead of a necessity. That was my real revenge. Not the meltdown, not Darren's humiliation, but the fact that I had rewritten the rules. I no longer begged for access. I controlled it. Back at home, my routine changed too. I didn't wake at 3 a.m. to chase badge anomalies in a humming basement. I didn't sip cold coffee while fluorescent lights rattled overhead. I woke when I wanted, brewed tea strong enough to chew, and opened my logs like morning prayers. My cat still curled by the window, purring through failures and recoveries, reminding me that systems weren't the only things worth tending. The office around me felt brighter, less like a cage, more like a command center. But no matter how far I traveled, no matter how many contracts I signed, one artifact remained at the center of it all. That old badge, framed in glass, with the brass plate beneath it. Sometimes I caught myself staring at it, remembering that morning at 6:02 when it blinked red, when my existence in that company ended with a tiny light refusing me entry. That wasn't the moment of defeat. It was the moment of clarity. That badge wasn't rejection. It was a reminder that the building had always belonged to me, not because of authority, but because of dependency. They had erased me from the logs, but they couldn't erase me from the system's bones. And when the bones gave out, the truth surfaced. Access and control are not the same thing. Darren had taken my access. I still had control. The irony is that Darren's name faded faster than the outage. Within months, no one even mentioned him in industry circles. But my report, my clauses, my warning, those lived on. I'd see echoes of my words in conference slides, in blog posts by engineers who had never met me, in forums where young sysadmins quoted my lines like scripture. They didn't know the whole story, but they knew enough. Ignore the ghost in the machine, and one day, the machine will haunt you. That was legacy enough for me. I never went back to that building again. Didn't need to. When people asked if I missed it, the racks, the hum, the ritual of keeping the place alive, I told them the truth. I didn't miss being ignored, dismissed, erased. I missed the system sometimes, yes, but not the people who thought it was theirs. I had built enough ghosts inside it that a part of me still lived there, humming in scripts, hidden in dependencies, waiting in loops. If someday they tried to rip it out completely, well, maybe the building would remind them again who had kept it alive all those years. In the end, my revenge wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was quiet, inevitable, and permanent. The badge blinked red once, long ago, but I'm still here. And now, when someone asks what I do, I let the brass plate answer for me. You should have asked what I do before deciding I didn't matter. People always expect revenge to end with fireworks, with someone humiliated in front of a crowd, a confession screamed into microphones, or a boardroom collapsing under the weight of scandal. Mine didn't end that way. It ended the same way it began, with silence, with control, with a single red light blinking in the dark, and me refusing to blink back. The company survived, technically. They patched their wounds, swapped out vendors, hired consultants who quoted my report without knowing its author sat quietly behind the screen name Badge 47. They even bragged at a conference about learning resilience. But survival is not triumph. Survival is just a quieter kind of failure, the kind that leaves scars no one bothers to show in the slide deck. Darren never reached out again. Last I heard, he was transitioned into a lateral role somewhere in California, far from access control, far from data centers, close enough to golf courses where buzzwords sound like strategy if you say them with a tan. I didn't follow him. I didn't need to. People like Darren always land somewhere soft, but the industry never forgets. His name is a warning now, whispered in side chats and private forums. Don't be a Darren. That was punishment enough. My own life took a different shape. Contracts came in steady, international clients with big budgets and bigger blind spots. They didn't see me as a relic. They saw me as the line between uptime and obituary. Some wanted fixes, others wanted foresight. All of them wanted to pay. I built my own consultancy, lean, precise, answerable only to myself. No HR, no Darren, no board that confused jargon with competence. Just me, my ThinkPad, and a cat who couldn't care less whether a server farm melted down. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it purrs. Still, I never threw away the badge. That relic stayed framed above my desk, its dead LED a reminder that erasure can be a gift if you know how to use it. Sometimes visitors ask why I keep it. I tell them the truth. It's not a trophy. It's a warning. The brass plate beneath it doesn't brag. It educates. You should have asked what I do before deciding I didn't matter. Every contract I sign, every board I lecture, every system I resurrect is just a variation of that same lesson. The badge is proof, not of my exclusion, but of my endurance. Occasionally, late at night, I open my old logs. I let the lines scroll across the terminal, white text on black, steady as rainfall. I don't run commands. I don't intervene. I just watch, the way I did that first week after Darren shut me out, when the system began its slow unraveling without me. It's not nostalgia. It's ritual. A reminder that silence is a weapon, patience is a strategy, and absence can be the sharpest form of presence. I didn't topple that building with sabotage or hacks. I just let go, and letting go was enough. So that's the end. Not a collapse, not a firestorm, just a ghost stepping out of one machine and into a wider world where people finally understood the value of what they couldn't see. Quiet revenge, loud consequences. And if you want to know what I do now, it's simple. I make sure other companies don't learn the same lesson the hard way. But if they decide to ignore me, if they push me out, if they ever let that little red light blink again, well, they'll learn. Systems always remember their ghosts.